biblical principle of justice that's connected to this. The biblical concept of justice is that people get what they are owed. Seem fair? So the biblical principle of justice is on a both positive and negative level, right? Here's what I mean by that. On the negative level, if you do something bad, what you are owed is a consequence to that, yes? And justice is for the wicked person, for the evildoer, to receive a consequence, a recompense for their evil deed. This is pretty basic. This is not controversial, I don't think. Although these days in our society, it absolutely is controversial. On the positive side, justice would mean that what people are owed positively. So I've said this before. In the Old Testament, the poor are owed certain things. The poor in an agricultural society in the ancient Near East, if you were the owner of fields, you could go through your fields at harvest time, and you could go through and harvest them one time. Okay? And why is that? Because the poor are owed the right to glean from the leftovers so that they will not go hungry. So, and that is called in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word mishpat, justice. Justice for the poor is actually making sure that they get the part of the field that they are owed. So it's the idea that you can only harvest one time, and you were not allowed to harvest all the way to the very edges of your field. Why? Because the fringe of the field also, the poor had a right to come and get from that. Now, the point is this. Biblically, justice is the concept. People get what they are owed, negatively and positively. Now, the question that comes up in the Bible immediately with this is that always how the cosmos functions? And the answer is no. Because routinely, people do not get what they are owed. And that's part of what Solomon, I believe, the teacher in Ecclesiastes, has lamented now numerous times. If you can recall, he laments that the cosmos, the world, does not function according to the principle of justice that he would like to believe. So the teacher, he wants to believe that the wise and the righteous are rewarded. It's right there in chapter 9 and verse 1. He says, I considered how the wise and the righteous and their deeds are in the hand of God. So he wants to believe that the wise and the righteous are loved by God, and then, by implication, the wicked are what? Hated by God, not loved by God. The wicked are punished. We see this in chapter 8 and verse 12. This is what Solomon wants to believe. Though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will he prolong his days like a shadow because he does not fear before God. So Solomon wants to believe that the wise and the righteous are rewarded and the wicked are punished. Now, why do I say Solomon wants to believe that? Because he looks around at reality and he sees everything that is under the sun. And it's very difficult indeed for him to believe what he wants to believe is true. And so here in chapter 9, Solomon takes up what we would call a theodicy. A theodicy is a defense of the goodness of God in light of the reality of evil. You get that? This is not a shallow problem. So sometimes we don't want to listen to people. We don't want to engage in real conversation with people. And people in our culture today are asking the same basic question: how can you believe in an almighty, good God when you look around at the world? And Christians, we have answers to that question, but you have to understand, that's a deep question of the heart. Okay? When you're looking at, it's easy for us when we're not thinking very deeply, when we're not thinking about the real reality of the depravity and the evil of the world that we live in. Now, some of you you've seen more of that than others have in various capacities. But it's not a shallow problem. It's not a trite problem. When we know that right this very second, right now, while I'm reading this text, while I'm preaching this sermon, while we're singing our songs, while we're doing all these things, there's places in the world right this very second where people are suffering unimaginably. They are being subjected to evil, to depravity, to brutality, to horrific crimes. Right now, that's happening. And so Solomon, he's aware of that. And he's aware of the fact that the wicked, they get away with it routinely. And so in light of that, and really in light of death, the fact that every single person ends up with the same destiny as far as he can see, he takes up a theodicy. How do we defend the goodness of an almighty God in light of what we see in the world? And that's what chapter 9 is. In some ways, chapter 9 is like the culmination of Solomon's wrestling with the vanity of life. One of the main themes through this book is the Hebrew word hevel, meaninglessness, illusory, false, frustrating. And all of life is like that. And he can't get over that because he's only allowing for the perspective under the sun. And here it culminates and he gives this extended treatment of his frustration with death in defending the goodness of God. So that's where we're at. The biggest problem Solomon